I believe you have one life. Use it.
Since 3 years old, you want to be an entertainer?
Well, I have never believed in a hereafter.
The only thing worse than not having anything to wear is to have nothing to put it on.
She made millions laugh with her cackle, her cigarette holder, and jokes about the perfect train wreck marriage. But every time Phyllis Diller stepped off stage, she carried a secret almost no one in Hollywood knew. A secret that forced her to keep working, even when her heart literally stopped beating. For decades, she lived two lives, and only one of them was funny. Phyllis Diller wasn't supposed to become famous. She didn't look like the women Hollywood celebrated. She didn't sound like them either. While other performers chased elegance and likability, she leaned into chaos, big hair, bad clothes, and a laugh loud enough to crack glass. She made herself a caricature on purpose. People thought it was just an act, a clever way to stand out. But it was much more than that. It was a shield. Long before sold-out shows and television spots, she was a mother drowning in responsibility, disappointment, and fear. The world saw her as the queen of self-deprecating comedy, joking about her imaginary husband, Fang, and her disastrous domestic life. But those jokes weren't just punchlines, they were cover stories. What she didn't tell the public was that her real marriage was collapsing under the weight of poverty, instability, and emotional damage. In the 1950s, when she first stepped on stage in San Francisco, audiences assumed she was exaggerating her misery to get laughs. They didn't know she was barely keeping her family fed. They didn't know she was raising multiple children with no help. They didn't know she performed after crying in her car. And they definitely didn't know what she did once a week, every week, for more than 30 years. While the audience laughed at the jokes about Fang, she was carrying a private heartbreak that shaped every decision, every performance, and every mile she traveled. It was the reason she never slowed down, even when her body gave out. It was the reason she kept smiling through bankruptcy, divorce, and death. It was the reason she didn't retire when most comedians her age had already vanished. That secret wasn't a rumor, a fling, or a scandal. It was a person. And she hid them from the world with everything she had. Phyllis Diller didn't come from noise or chaos. She came from silence, an eerie kind of quiet that only exists in houses where joy feels like a visitor, not a resident. She was born in 1917 to parents who were already old by the standards of the time. Her father was 55, her mother was 36. They weren't raising a child in the rush of youth, they were aging, weary, and set in their ways. Most children grow up surrounded by play. Phyllis grew up surrounded by funerals. Relatives and neighbors were always dying, and she attended more services than birthday parties. Instead of being scared of death, she grew almost comfortable with it. The darkness didn't frighten her, it fascinated her. In a different life, that fascination might have stayed hidden, but in hers, it became the birthplace of her humor. When other kids ran or cried, she cracked jokes. Not because she wanted to be funny, but because it was the only way she knew to push the sadness away. Her home wasn't abusive, it was empty. Quiet dinners, quiet hallways, quiet disappointments. She entertained herself by making up stories in her head, imitating voices, twisting serious moments into absurd ones. She didn't know it then, but those imaginary punchlines were rehearsals. She rejected religion early, even though her home leaned Methodist. It offered promises she didn't believe and comfort that didn't reach her. Instead, she turned inward. The Great Depression made sure no one in her family escaped reality. Money disappeared, stability vanished, and the loneliness that already lived inside the house finally took up all the space. But she didn't crumble. She started selling newspapers. She cracked jokes with classmates. She built armor, piece by piece, sarcasm, wit, and bravery disguised as laughter. What no one realized was that this armor wouldn't just protect her from childhood. It would protect her from everything that came next. Before comedy, there was music, and before the wigs and the cackle, there was a piano and a girl who could play better than anyone twice her age. At just 10 years old, Phyllis was accepted into the Sherwood Music Conservatory in Chicago, a place that didn't just take talented students, it took prodigies. She practiced for hours, mastering difficult pieces adults struggled with. Teachers believed she would become a concert pianist. For most kids, that kind of future would feel like destiny. But destiny doesn't always care about talent. Her family couldn't afford to keep her there when the Great Depression hit. By 1933, money was gone, and she had to leave the conservatory after just 3 years. She didn't quit because she lacked skill. She quit because surviving came first. She took jobs wherever she could, shelving dreams the way other people shelved books. Still, she tried again. In 1935, she enrolled at Bluffton to study music education. She thought if she couldn't perform, maybe she could teach. But 2 years later, in 1937, she walked away once more, this time for marriage. She was barely 20 and she already believed she'd wasted her future. That choice haunted her. She regretted it the way other people carried keepsakes. The piano had been her escape, her identity, and her proof that she could be more than the life she was born into. Losing it didn't just change her plans, it cracked something inside her. But the cracks would later become openings. In those quiet years before comedy, while moving from town to town with a husband who couldn't keep a job and children she could barely afford to feed, Phyllis thought she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. What she didn't know was that the stage she was meant for didn't have keys, and soon tragedy was going to push her straight towards it.
Marriage didn't bring stability. It brought motion. Constant, exhausting, unforgiving motion. Between 1940 and 1945, Phyllis and her husband Sherwood moved at least 8 times across the country. Rent was unstable, income was spotty, and nothing felt permanent except the pressure. Her first child, Peter, was born in 1940. She was barely ready, emotionally or financially. The country was in wartime rationing, and families were expected to survive on $25 a week. That wasn't enough to live on, let alone raise children. While Sherwood floated in and out of employment, Phyllis held the house together with tape and willpower. Their second child, Sally, arrived in 1944. By then, the smiles she wore at church and neighborhood gatherings were costumes, not feelings. And then came the moment that changed her in ways the public would never see. In 1945, she gave birth to a premature son. Some said his name was Perry. Others said he wasn't named at all. He lived only 2 weeks. No doctors could save him. No prayers reached him. The pain didn't break her. It buried itself inside her, silent and sharp. She never spoke about it publicly for decades. Not long after, she suffered a miscarriage. The grief doubled, but there was no space in her life to process it. She was already responsible for 2 young children. There was no time for tears, only survival. What looked like strength was actually necessity. To cope, she turned to writing small articles, $2 apiece. Not because she dreamed of being published, but because $2 bought food. While Sherwood remained unemployed for long stretches, she became the unseen foundation of a collapsing house. These weren't the years of laughter. These were the years of drowning quietly. But the world would never guess that the woman who joked about disaster was living inside one. And the worst wasn't over. Phyllis didn't stumble into comedy because she wanted to be famous. She did it because survival was running out of hiding places. By the early 1950s, she had 5 children, a husband who refused jobs he thought were beneath him, and a house that seemed to shrink every day under the weight of unpaid bills. They lived off food stamps and powdered milk. Sherwood wasted a $10,000 inheritance that could have saved him. Eviction notices became routine. At one point, they were kicked out of their home over just $300 in unpaid rent. Phyllis was writing articles for pennies, editing newspapers when she could, and pawning what little she had left. Her breaking point didn't look like a breakdown. It looked like a joke. Sherwood despite his failures, kept telling her she was funny. He pushed her to try stand-up, not out of belief, but out of desperation to stay afloat. In 1952, she performed for the first time at a veterans hospital. She bombed. The audience heckled her while she tried to play piano and tell jokes. Someone else might have stopped right there. She didn't. She took the humiliation and used it like fuel. That same year, she did her first real stand-up set. It didn't change her life yet. They were still pawning jewelry to pay rent, still hiding overdue bills, still pretending everything was fine to anyone who asked. Then, March 7th, 1955 arrived. She stepped onto the stage at San Francisco's Purple Onion at 37 years old, surrounded by performers half her age, dressed in clothes that didn't match, and armed with jokes about an imaginary husband named Fang, and cooking so bad it could kill you. People couldn't stop laughing. A short booking turned into an 89-week run, nearly 2 years. The club made over $100,000 off her shows. She earned just $100 a week, but it was more than she'd ever seen at once. The public thought a star had finally risen. In truth, a woman on the edge had just found a louder way to scream. And she still hadn't revealed what she was hiding. As her fame grew, so did the lie of simplicity. Audiences thought Phyllis was just a fearless comedian who exaggerated her misery for laughs. They didn't realize she was hiding a truth she could never turn into a punchline. Her daughter, Sally, born in 1944, began showing signs of severe mental illness as a child. By the 1950s, the symptoms turned into full psychosis. Schizophrenia wasn't something people talked about then. It was whispered about, hidden, or denied entirely. Treatment options were bleak and often cruel. Hospitals were cold, sterile places built to contain, not heal. Phyllis tried to keep Sally at home as long as she could, juggling motherhood, poverty, and an unraveling marriage. But as the illness worsened, safety, for Sally and the other children, collapsed. Around 1960, Phyllis made the most painful decision of her life. She placed her daughter in institutional care. Nobody knew. No reporters, no friends in Hollywood, not even fans who obsessed over her personal life. While she joked about kids and chaos, she was silently visiting a child the world didn't know existed anymore. And she didn't go once in a while. She went every week, for more than 30 decades. She drove to the same facility, signed her name, stepped into a quiet room, and sat with the one person she couldn't fix, couldn't save, and couldn't bring home. Then, in 1993, the visits stopped. Sally died at just 49 years old. Phyllis didn't pause her career, didn't announce anything publicly, didn't take time off. She went right back to work, performing like nothing had happened. People said she was unstoppable. They thought she loved the spotlight too much to slow down. They didn't understand. She wasn't running toward fame. She was running from the silence.
By the time the public started calling her a legend, Phyllis Diller had already lived through enough private disasters to fill 3 lifetimes. But she didn't slow down. She sped up. Television appearances, comedy tours, albums, radio spots, game shows. She said yes to everything. People thought it was ambition. They didn't see the truth. The busier she was, the less time she had to think. Her fictional husband, Fang, became the perfect distraction. Every joke about him, his laziness, his stupidity, his flaws, was a safer substitute for real pain. Sherwood, her actual husband, had spiraled so badly into instability, debt, and emotional distance that comedy became her only weapon against the truth of her real marriage. When she finally divorced him in 1965, it wasn't freedom, it was fallout. Not even a month passed before she remarried, but that relationship collapsed even faster. The world called it eccentric. She knew it was survival. Hollywood didn't know what to do with her. She wasn't glamorous, young, or polished, so she leaned into the opposite. She wore horrible dresses on purpose. She chose wigs that looked electrocuted. She painted her face like a circus act. She turned ugly into a brand and monetized every inch of it. But the costumes weren't vanity. They were masks. The cigarette holder, the laugh, the hair, the fast-talking self-slander, every piece of her persona was designed to keep people from looking deeper. Even in the 1960s and 70s, when she toured with Bob Hope, starred in sitcoms, and became a regular on Hollywood squares, the secret followed her. She taped 5 shows a day, then drove to visit Sally, laughed for the audience, then cried in the car, cracked punchlines on national TV, then paid hospital bills in silence. To fans, she was untouchable. To herself, she was barely holding the paint on the mask. And the hits weren't done coming. Most people slow down when life collapses. Phyllis didn't. She accelerated. The more pain she buried, the louder the laughter got. In 1990, while still visiting Sally every week, another blow struck. Her son, Peter, was diagnosed with cancer. She kept performing, traveling, and writing jokes while quietly bracing for another funeral. He died in 1998 at just 53 years old. She was on the road performing when the news broke. She didn't cancel a single show. But Peter wasn't the first child she'd buried. Back in 1945, she had already lost a newborn son just 2 weeks after his birth. She never mentioned him publicly until decades later. The pain from that death had shaped the way she carried every one that followed. Then came the one that ended everything. In 1993, Sally, the daughter she had visited for more than 30 years, died at 49. That was the secret the world never knew. The weekly visits ended, not because she stopped showing up, but because there was no one left to visit. And still, she kept working. People assumed she was addicted to attention. They said she loved the spotlight too much to retire. They thought the wigs, the voice, the jokes were signs of ego and endurance. They had no idea she was grieving in motion. Then in 2002, grief hit again. Her daughter Stephanie died of a stroke at just 54. 3 of her children are gone, one institutionalized for life, a newborn buried decades earlier. 4 losses in total. Yet Phyllis didn't disappear from the public eye, not for a week, not for a day. To her, silence was the most dangerous thing in the world. She performed with a pacemaker. She told jokes with a broken spine. She laughed through depression and heart failure, because stopping meant remembering, and remembering was worse than dying. The world thought she was tireless. They didn't realize she was outrunning ghosts.
As the years stacked up, Phyllis didn't fade. She changed forms. When her body started breaking down, she didn't retreat from the spotlight. She rebuilt herself to stay in it. Starting in the early 1970s, she began undergoing plastic surgery, one procedure after another. Facelifts, nose work, eye lifts, tattoos for eyeliner, cheek fillers, breast reductions. 15 surgeries in total. She joked that no 2 parts of her body were the same age anymore. The public thought she was just vain. They didn't understand. She was constructing armor. One facelift nearly killed her. In 1999, during a surgery-related complication, her heart actually stopped. She needed a pacemaker after that. Instead of slowing down, she turned the experience into a comedy routine and kept performing. She wrote books, not polished biographies, but blunt, funny survival manuals like The Joys of Aging and How to Avoid Them. Each one looked like humor on the surface, but between the lines were confessions disguised as punchlines. When age pushed her off the comedy stage in the early 2000s, she didn't announce retirement, she just shifted. She started painting, turning the walls of her Brentwood mansion into a private gallery. Some pieces sold for thousands. One painting took her 15 years to finish. She hosted parties where people came to laugh, drink,
and pretend not to notice how frail she had become. On television, she reappeared in cartoons and cameo roles, Family Guy, A Bug's Life, The Bold and the Beautiful. Her voice stayed busy even when her body couldn't. But behind the makeup and layers of fabric, the losses were catching up. Her children were gone one by one. Her longtime partner, Robert Hastings, died in 1996. Her heart had stopped twice. Her spine had fractured in 2007. Her body was giving out, but quitting would have meant silence, and she feared silence more than death. The world thought she had finally found peace in her later years. They didn't know the biggest truth was still buried with her. By the time Phyllis Diller made her final public appearance in May 2012, she was 94 years old, frail, slowing down, but still smiling for the cameras. She accepted a Lifetime Achievement Award in her hometown of Lima, Ohio, the same quiet place where her story began. No one in that room knew they were watching her last bow. 3 months later, on August 20th, 2012, she died in her Brentwood home. Her heart finally stopped for good. Her manager said she passed in her sleep, with a smile on her face. The world celebrated her as a comedy pioneer, the woman who broke into stages women weren't allowed to stand on. They remembered the wigs, the laughter, the jokes about Fang. They praised her timing, her voice, her courage. What they didn't know was what she never said. She never told the public about the daughter she visited every week for more than 30 years. She never spoke about the Thursday drives to a locked facility, the sterile rooms, the conversations that faded into silence. She never explained why she never stopped working, even after her heart stopped beating on an operating table. Fans thought the stage was her passion. It was her escape. They thought the character she played was an exaggeration. It was camouflage. They thought she was fearless. She was terrified of stopping long enough to feel the losses she carried. By the time she died, she had outlived 4 of her 6 children. She had survived 2 failed marriages, bankruptcy, invasive surgeries, and the slow weight of grief that never left her side. Yet she didn't ask for pity. She turned pain into punchlines and hid sorrow in slapstick.
The world thought they knew Phyllis Diller, but they never met the woman behind the laugh. And the secret she guarded the longest didn't disappear when she did. It followed her into the dark.